Andre, thank you so much for coming to the studio, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
What do you think of our studios?
Beautiful studios.
I'm always looking to get people into the studios so that I can ask that question and say, what do you think of our studios? I don't know. It makes me feel a little important. It's beautiful studios. Let's talk a little bit about tax and the fact that we have a thing called SARS. And that SARS has a thing called the VDP, or the Voluntary Disclosure Programme. Already, and I'm a taxpayer, always have been, I'm feeling like I'm already being made to feel like I'm a criminal for people who take money from me that they haven't worked for, that I've worked for, and already I must go into this vestry and go and confess my sins. Sins sometimes I don't even know I have. What is this? What is this VDP? And I want to go deep. I want to excavate the motivations and the reasons for its existence. Man, I want to understand the very reasons for the existence of SARS, the whole taxation system. But let's start with VDP. What is that?
Okay. Thank you so much, Aubrey, for inviting us to your studios. Certainly very beautiful
nice
studios.
Yeah.
Very, very beautiful studios.
Yeah.
But to unpack the VDP, we must remember that the Voluntary Disclosure Programme is administered by SARS. However, it is regulated by the Tax Administration Act, or what we professionals, as you called us earlier, the TAA. The Voluntary Disclosure Programme, VDP, gives errant taxpayers an opportunity to come forward on a voluntary basis and declare their taxes to SARS, their tax defaults to SARS, whether that be knowing or unknowingly. There are certain rules and certain requirements as per the law, but the absolutely critical one is that it must be voluntary. We have many clients that come to us and say, listen, I've received this letter from SARS, a letter of investigation into my affairs. May I submit an application under the VDP? Unfortunately not. It must be a voluntary declaration.
Okay, so once they are saying to you, but come here, we want to smell your space, your tax space, you can't use VDP because it's supposed to be voluntary. In other words, it's got to be of your own volition. You have to proactively go to them and say, listen, I have issues. I want to confess to certain issues. But you've just said knowingly or unknowingly. Let's park knowingly for a moment. How do I know that I've got to say something to SARS when I don't even know that I've committed some sort of a tax misdemeanor, crime, whatever?
Certainly a very important question. And for the broad taxpayer population that are often unaware of their obligations to SARS, but we must remember, and not to go too technical, but in terms of Section 102 of the TAA, the taxpayer, in most instances, bears the onus of proving whether something is not taxable. And that goes deeper in light of the fact that if a taxpayer is prudent, and we've seen the courts delve into this on many, many occasions, all the way up to constitutional court level, where the court has battled with this concept of how would a person know? And unfortunately, ignorance of the law, as we know, is not a defense. If you are a prudent taxpayer, Aubrey, and you are unaware of how a certain transaction is taxed, or if it is even a taxable event, surely you would approach a tax practitioner or a specialist or a professional in the area merely to ask the question and to get an opinion from a professional. Is this a taxable event? Do I have to declare this to SARS? In short, the answer is yes. Declare everything to SARS, albeit it may not be taxable, but you must play open cards. You must declare everything to SARS.
I now know that because you've just said that, right? Okay. And my sense is that a lot of people don't know that. If I do something for somebody, if I build a wall for somebody, right, and they pay me 5,000 rands because I told them I'll build your wall for 5,000 rands, and I'm given my 5,000 rands, my immediate thought is not I've got to pay SARS for I don't know what. And I really genuinely want you to talk to me about why we have to pay SARS anything, all right? But the moment I've built that wall and you've given me my 5,000 rands, hell, buddy, we're good. Why should I pay SARS anything?
The reason why I should pay SARS, Aubrey, is because SARS are the collection arm of the state, of the government, in order to ensure efficient running and efficient collection of taxes. Let's use that example of the wall to extend that example.
Yeah.
And let's say, for example, your friend or whoever it may be, please, Aubrey, build me this wall. I'll pay you 5,000 rand. You agree. As the prudent wall builder you are, you go and do your homework. You go to a renovation store, you go to a building store, and you calculate that that's going to cost you 3,000 rand, for argument's sake.
Yeah.
Your profit then in your mind is 2,000 rand.
Right.
And in terms of the law, SARS allows you to pay tax on the profit made on a certain trade. Most taxpayers are of the mistaken belief that I only have to pay tax on my employment income. And that generally, for most taxpayers, is not by choice. It's because your employer withholds the PAYE, pays over to SARS, their portion, and then pays you the difference.
Okay, but I mean, in a scenario of being an employee of employment, that's when I am trusting that my company will take care of that stuff of paying those people whom nobody knows, right? But I've built the wall. Let's go back to the wall thing. I've built the wall. Yes, I've calculated that in order for me to build the wall, I've got to get materials that'll cost me about, 2,000 rands, and the other 1,000 rands is for my hands, right? And then the other 2,000 rands is for the commercial process and me making this worth my while because I've got kids and I've got bills to pay, right? I'm honest when I say to you that my mind is not thinking about SARS, right? I'm thinking about the school fees. I'm thinking about the interest rates and the money that I've got to pay for my bond. That's what I'm thinking about. So when I have to go to SARS and say, oh, I haven't been paying you whatever it is that I'm supposed to pay you on the profit, it's honestly because I didn't know. I didn't know that that's the case. And I'm willing to wager that a significant percentage of South Africans don't know. So how are they going to even know how and when to use VDP, this voluntary disclosure facility that SARS has in place, if there is no Aubrey Masango show and André to come and talk to us about this? And then if they don't, how can they be held liable for not knowing?
Very, very difficult
you know what
question.
I mean?
And I certainly hear where you're coming from. But again, taxpayers have the duty to be a prudent taxpayer and to educate themselves.
Right.
And where you can't educate yourself, the same way that your friend approached you to build a wall because he knew he wasn't capable, the same way Aubrey, the prudent taxpayer, will approach a tax professional and say, I'm unaware of any tax defaults. All I know is I get my salary from my employer. They withhold the PAYE. I now want to please file my tax return for 2023. It's filing season. Please, can you assist me? Your prudent tax practitioner will then say, okay, Aubrey, please, can we have all of your information? Do you have rental properties? Do you have a side hustle, as we're calling it these days? Do you have any other sources of income? Do you have any offshore income? Because as a South African tax resident, and this is where a lot of taxpayers run into trouble, as a South African tax resident, you are liable for tax on your worldwide income.
Yeah, we had that conversation with your colleagues the other week.
I'm sure you did.
Jeez.
And as a non-South African tax resident, you are only liable for tax from a source within the Republic of South Africa. So a lot of the time we have, taxpayers coming in and will find on the off chance or through an investigation of their tax affairs, we call it a tax diagnostic. Sort of like going to the doctor and saying, I feel unwell, I'm uncertain, I don't know why I get these dizzy spells, as an example. The tax diagnostic is a test where we go through your affairs on e-filing and we determine, according to what you've declared on e-filing and according to the records that you have, what you should have declared and whether you have fully done so. A lot of the time, we'll have a taxpayer that has an offshore property that's bringing in a rental income, and the mistaken belief that we often find is, no, I have the property in the UK and I pay tax there. Why should I pay tax in South Africa? Or, no, it's in the UK. I'm sure SARS doesn't need to receive tax money on that, correct? No. As a South African tax resident, you must declare your worldwide income
Why?
to SARS.
Why?
That's the law.
No, I get that. I get that it's the law. I want to understand the rationale behind the law. We had the conversation about 2 weeks ago about the fact that we have tax residents, South Africans, or people that are not even South African, but are tax resident here in South Africa. And it was made very clear that they must pay tax for all of their income globally. Yeah? To South Africa. And I am tax resident, non-tax resident, and I pay tax to South Africa for the income I get in South Africa, right? While I'm working in South Africa. Why? Why? Give me the rationale why, besides that it's the law. Why must I pay the tax for property that I have offshore to the South African Revenue Service? Why?
As a South African taxpayer, or to use the example of the offshore property,
Yeah.
as a South African taxpayer, you have the benefit of using South African services. You have the benefit of using.
Oh, dude, it sounds
South
like the
African
TV license
institutions.
argument, man. Really? Okay, but yeah. Okay.
100%.
Yeah.
And I understand why taxpayers are frustrated. But the fact that we are frustrated with perhaps the government of the day, or perhaps we're frustrated with the fact that the tax is not being utilized in the way that it should be.
Yeah.
That, unfortunately, is an argument for another day and a
Sure.
totally different
Sure.
topic.
Sure.
Again, if taxpayers are prudent and they, we've seen this in other countries where they are quick to change governments. There's a motion of no confidence declared, and next thing there's a new prime minister.
Yep.
The population are
It's
quick
like
to
the
act.
local government here in South Africa. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah.
But-
Look, I hear you, man. I hear you. I'm pushing because I want to get to the VDP. I want to get to the bones and the details around the VDP story. But honestly, I honestly believe that a lot of South Africans are grappling with these questions at a philosophical level as to, dude, I don't watch the SABC. Don't. But I'm expected to do the right thing and pay the SABC TV license. It's the right thing to do, I'm told. I want to get what is right about it. To whom is it right? Because it doesn't feel right to me. I get the argument that says it's the law, Orbs, right? That's the law. And we're not talking about the efficiencies, the righteousness of the government in power at that particular time. That's not the issue here. For me, it's why? What value do I get for all of this paying that I'm doing, right? And because if you show me that value, then yeah, sure, I'm happy to pay. Maybe I'm not happy to pay, but I understand why I'm paying. I can guarantee you. And by the way, give us a call 011-883-0702. André Daniels is my guest. We're talking about taxation at a really fundamental level, because I believe that we can only bring the conversation of the VDP once we understand those fundamentals, right? I want to know from you, do you know that it is your duty, right? Your duty as a South African taxpayer to understand that you must pay certain amounts of money to SARS for certain reasons. I'm still getting the reasons from André. But give me a call, because my sense is that we are wallowing in a sea of ignorance as South African taxpayers, and we don't know even how to ask the questions because we don't know what we don't know. We've been brought up and we were born into a system where taxes must be paid, and we pay them because we don't really take money out of the wallet and pay it. It already gets taken by the company that I'm working for, so I can't even argue for that money. But I do want to be closer to the reasons why all of this money is being taken from me. And beyond just it's the law, beyond just you are in a country, you're making use of certain infrastructure and you're paying for that. I really would like to know the direct relationship I have. You watch the calls; they're going crazy. It's starting to come through. So I'm really happy this is happening. But I would love to hear your questions as you listen to my conversation with André about taxation in general. And then the second part of our conversation is going to be dedicated to understanding the SARS Voluntary Disclosure Programme, the VDP, because then I think we are going to have South Africans who want to be part of the process, who want to contribute, and maybe less truancy. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So I go back to my silly question. Why? Why should I pay taxes on a property that I have offshore that is being taxed in that country to South Africa? Why?
Chances are, as a South African tax resident, the majority of your income was earned in South Africa. The offshore property is an investment. That's why it's not at your center of vital interests. And this is perhaps a conversation for another one of my colleagues that delves into the residency.
Sure.
And that's a conversation and another technical aspect. That's a discussion for another day, perhaps.
Sure.
But I think the tax morality is certainly linked to the value, as you put it earlier.
Is that what it's called? Tax morality?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
There have been, in certain instances, a shift in tax morality where taxpayers will think, but why am I paying for this? I pay, I'm in the 45% bracket as an example.
I'm paying out of my wazoo. I mean, come on.
I
Yeah.
must have medical aid.
Right.
Arguably, I contribute to the medical system.
I even pay cold drink on the streets.
I wouldn't admit to that in the open air, but jokes aside,
A hypothetical talk show host pays. Okay. Yeah.
Jokes aside, the tax morality is certainly linked to the benefit provided to citizens on the ground. As you put it, what am I getting? Quid pro quo. I'm giving X amount. I should receive a level of Y service.
Yeah.
If I'm not receiving that level of Y service, the tax morality tends to decrease. However, there is then the carrot and the stick that we must consider. In certain instances where there's low tax morality, the collection efforts and the arm of the state that collects is probably one of the most efficient in collections. And again, SARS are one of the top 3 collection agencies in the world. It's the IRS, the Australian Revenue Authority, and then SARS.
So they can take the money, yeah?
They can. They are empowered. And again, I know you said we shouldn't delve into the law, but SARS have powers given to them by the legislature in the Tax Administration Act and in other tax laws that empowers them, Aubrey, to obtain a certified statement. A certified statement is seen as a judgment. There's no proceedings held. That senior SARS official signs off on the tax liability as calculated by SARS. The person hasn't taken steps to dispute, hasn't taken steps to suspend the payment, hasn't taken steps to enter into an arrangement with SARS, nor have they entered into a compromise agreement with SARS. SARS will collect. SARS will go to the High Court of whichever jurisdiction and obtain a certified statement that becomes an order of court. SARS will then be knocking at your door. And
Or
by
just,
then,
or just go to your bank account and just grab the money.
yes, Section 179
It's
deals
happened
with
to me once.
third-party appointments. And the courts have confirmed for us, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on which side you look at it, SARS operates on the principle of pay now, argue later.
Yeah. All right. Lots of calls coming through. I want to take those calls. Then I want to move on to VDP. Folks, so this is how I'm getting it, right? Before I take the calls. We live in a country that has infrastructure, that has roads, that has all sorts of things. And in order for us to continue to enjoy the presence of those creature comforts, we pay a tax. That is non-negotiable. But we are still burdened with the responsibility of understanding that we must do the paying of these taxes to the fullest. That's our responsibility as taxpayers. We must be clear about how much money we get from all sources of income, and we have the responsibility, and that's what you call tax morality, right? We have the moral tax morality to pay that money, and we need to understand that. Now, trust me, I sit here across André, and I'm grappling with this thing. I'm working through it. It's work. I'm working through it. But I want to take your calls before we even get into the VDP, because if we don't have that basic foundation, that basic understanding, the understanding that says you've got to voluntarily come and tell SARS that you have not been paying certain things, we won't connect to that. There's going to be a disconnect, a misconnect, and then the non-compliance is going to continue and maybe even exacerbate. So I want to take these calls, but I want to move into the conversation around the VDP. We've got calls on social media. We've got calls on the line. I'm going to take some of those calls, ask Daniel to answer them, and then I want to go into the VDP conversation. Owen is in Orlando West. Hi, Owen.
Hey, Brati, how's it?
Hey, Tarame, Auti, I'm good, thanks.
Thank you, Prof.
Sure.
Thank you, Prof. And your guest as well on the line, on the studio. So this is a question. Here you guys talking about declaring and not declaring and all of that. So how does the SARS people recognize all my earnings? Let's say, for example, maybe I do odd jobs, maybe somewhere in Benoni, where I get the cash by hand. Do I still have to declare that money? And if I don't, how will they have proof that I've actually, obtained that money? Because the money doesn't go straight into my account; it goes straight to me. That is the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is now, which means that if I have to pay tax as a South African taxpayer, but let's say, for example, I'm in the UK, and I'm not using any of the services here in South Africa. Maybe once in a while, maybe once when I come and visit the family. So how does that work as well? So which means that a lot of people who are in South Africa and receiving your health care, everything, security, whatever that they're receiving, and they are not registered in South Africa. So those people actually getting free fees, that's what you say. And how do they get taxed? Because they wouldn't have to declare anything.
Yeah. All right. Okay, I understand your question, Bob, because I was the same question.
Too long.
I get it. All right, let's hear what André has to say. André?
Okay, thank you for the question. In terms of the first question, where you are receiving funds, whether cash or otherwise, this must be declared to SARS, and you must pay tax thereon. There are obviously exceptions if you don't meet the threshold for tax, and after rebates, and there's certain calculations, but you must declare everything to SARS, whether cash or otherwise. And there was actually recently an article I wrote on the Commissioner of SARS v. M. The reason why it's M is to protect the taxpayer's identity. This gentleman received funds in his bank account back in 2007, 2008. SARS went back to the assessments and said, 2007 you declared 5,000. Your bank account for that year is income of 50,000. Please can you kindly explain the 45,000 rand difference? The taxpayer in the instance could not explain the differences, and thus tax was raised on those amounts.
He had to pay.
Yes.
Yo.
High Court judgment, he had to pay. This is going into millions.
Yeah.
So, again, how SARS gets the information, I think was the caller's question. SARS have access to third-party data. SARS can ask different jurisdictions. We have this person's passport number, ID number, address. What information do you have on Mr. X, Mr. Taxpayer? What information do you have on Mrs. Taxpayer? I'll then exchange the information because it's beneficial to both taxing systems. But in terms of the information, SARS has wide powers to obtain information. I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that open their tax return with the intention to file, and they think, how does SARS know how much I contribute to my medical aid? But that's because there's a certificate, and the medical aid exchanges information with SARS. There's a certificate that has to be published as per the law, so SARS get this information from various third parties.
Even the cash stuff that happens between the hands?
Eventually, SARS will catch on. There are obviously a few that will slip through the cracks here and there, but myself, as a prudent taxpayer, I wouldn't want to be burdened with the information, putting my head down at night. Are SARS going to find out? Are SARS not going to find out? Every time there's a knock at the door, every time there's something that you're not used to, you may get away with it. Your brother, your cousin, your aunt may have gotten away with non-declaration, but will you? Can you guarantee that SARS won't catch on?
And I think it's at this moment that we need to understand the issue of the tax morality. That if we ask questions to better evade the system, that is the sign that you're going to get caught.
Yes.
Right? So for me, it's important for us to understand the conversation that we're having in this context so that we can be better contributors to the best possible running of our country. That is at the basis of why we have to have this tax morality. I want to argue, Andre, that conversation hasn't been had in South Africa. We haven't had the conversation that says, this is why you pay taxes. You are literally contributing to the running of the country. It's not just the voting every 5 years. It's your taxes that are running the country. That's why you've got to then argue and contend for a better run country because you're paying for it.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to connect here is the utilitarian relationship between my paying and my tax paying and the running of the country, and why it's important for me to be angry when I see a guy walking away with a whole robot, the pole. Yesterday I saw stuff on what do you call this stuff? The socials, talking about a guy who's just walking up and down the streets with a pole from a traffic light that he'd cut, and nobody did anything. And the reason for that is because we don't feel like it touches us. It touches you, and it touches you because you pay for it, literally, right? So,
yes.
So those are the issues that we need to have the conversation about. Let me speak to Monica in Orlando West. Folks from Orlando West are calling in this evening. Monica?
Andre, please help me here. There are many non-South Africans, aliens or whatever you call them, who are making millions of money in South Africa, and they're not banked. What does SARS do about them? And number two, I'd like to know if politicians pay tax. How come they're so careless with the money? Is it because only we taxpayers are the ones contributing?
All right, Monica in Orlando West. You see how those questions are going to come? Because South Africans are trying to make the link as to, okay, so I'm now expected to voluntarily go to SARS and say, listen, I've been paying. But I don't even know why I'm paying. And that conversation hasn't been had. And I know that we haven't gotten to the VDP yet. But you can't have the VDP conversation if we haven't dealt with this stuff. Talk to Monica.
Thank you, Monica, for your questions. In terms of what SARS are doing on illicit economy, there is a division in SARS. There is an anonymous hotline that you can report these things to. If you Google it, it's easily identifiable.
The rogue unit.
You can, yes. you can declare, you can report these people that that you see are maybe handling large sums of cash that you think perhaps they're not paying taxes. Again, in terms of the politicians, every South African must pay tax if they are above the threshold. And I can guarantee you that politicians are indeed above that threshold. Politicians must pay tax. Politicians are ordinary taxpayers. And we've seen this. SARS, how many times, Aubrey, have you seen in the news, person X, Mr. Y, hasn't got his tax affairs in order, but he's, has a certain position. And we can see that is SARS enforcing the law equally across the taxpayer population, regardless of status. And I think that's an important thing. SARS must enforce the legislation and must enforce collection where correct and where taxpayers are not voluntarily disclosing and not voluntarily paying over their taxes.
Just Do Eat on Twitter says, hi Aubrey, can you ask your guest about any clever tax evasion tricks that are legal but bordering on the edge? It's tough out there, says Just Do Eat. You see, the issue of tax morality hasn't been dealt with. And I'm hoping that you guys are going to be coming through more often to come and talk to us about this issue. Because we haven't connected with it yet. All we feel like as South Africans is that we're just getting the money taken from us for no conceivable reason. We need to connect South Africans to the reasons why we need to be tax moral. That's why we'll have a question like that being asked openly on Twitter. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I fully see where you're coming from. Yeah.
Okay.
I hear you.
Let me go to the line. Come and look at my lines. It's crazy, right? And we haven't even started the VDP conversation. So do you see that you need to come back and we need to talk about VDP in context,
yes.
Right? So let's talk to John from Parktown. Hi, John.
Hi, André. Thank you for a very interesting topic. Just a quick question. Number one is, if I've already been taxed and now I'm using my money that's left, I buy property offshore, it's not bringing that income. So, while I was in SA, I was maybe in the 45% tax bracket. But now offshore, I'm not getting that much. Do I still have to pay the same percentage? And yeah, that's mainly my question. And do permanent residents also have to pay now SARS, even though they're forgaining the money in the country and they've gone back to their country?
Okay. Thank you so much for the question.
Thanks, John.
In terms of the rental property and paying percentages, SARS will tax your salary and your normal income based on percentages, whereas with the rental property, like the example we gave with the wall earlier, SARS will see that as a separate trade compared to your employment income. A calculation will be performed in terms of your income is X as per what was either received in your bank account or as per a statement from the estate agent or perhaps your lease agreement to evidence the amount you are receiving. The deductions in terms of your expenses, water, electricity, some landlords provide DSTV, Wi-Fi services, X, Y, and Z that are deductible. Depreciation on the property that are deductible. You are then only taxed on the profit that you're making. Again, this is then applied to the percentage that you're making. If the property is offshore, SARS do consider the fact that there are foreign taxes and you'll often be granted a foreign tax credit if you can prove that you've paid tax in a foreign jurisdiction to avoid the double taxation of the taxpayer in question. In terms of the permanent residency question, that's also very important, but we must consider tax resident as a concept in tax and a resident in terms of immigration or immigration are two completely separate concepts.
Sure.
There's
I remember we had that conversation about 2 weeks ago about the residency, tax residency in terms of tax, and then the residency in terms of geographical
location.
Domicilium
Yes.
exutandi. Right? Those are different things, and they've got different conversations connected to them. I hear that. But again, do you see? Do you see the deficit in our understanding of the tax morality issue? I hope SARS is listening to this conversation. I know they do, but I hope they are listening to this conversation, because I think this is a moment for SARS to understand a component of the South African tax conversation that may have been overlooked. Let me speak to Tabang in Pretoria. Good evening to you, Tabang.
Yeah, good evening.
Hi, Tabang.
Well, I fully understand why I pay tax, because I've worked for government before.
Sure.
And I fully understand, what tax does for the economy, for the country, for the citizens, and many other things.
Sure.
However, with the experience that I've had, 2018, I don't work for government anymore. I'm at a point where, as much as I'm tax compliant, I wish I could find ways to actually be a tax avoider or a tax evader, because SARS has proven to me, based on the experience that I've had with them, even if after I'd followed all the processes and their own processes and systems, that they went and garnished me in 2017 for 3 months without even informing me, and they claimed that they could not find me. And during that time, I was still working for government, and I said, how are you saying you can find me when I work for government? They never answered me. And then I had to use the tax ombud, to actually fight them and to stop them from garnishing me. And the ombud agreed with me, because I finished all the evidence that SARS behaved like a bully and just went after me without following any due process and without even doing anything. And the tax ombud had recommended that they need to repay me my money. They have never paid my money. I've been writing, I've been doing whatever, and SARS couldn't care less. Actually, SARS is the worst communicator. SARS doesn't like to communicate back. SARS, even if when you follow process, you submit, you do notice of appeal, notice of objections, you do everything. You even quote their own laws. SARS comes. But I know of many politicians who owe SARS probably millions, and even probably some other high-profile people in the country. And SARS, all they do is to tell them that they need to pay, but doesn't go and take the money first, like what they did to me. And for me, really, I'm still upset even now, because they even recently went into my bank account and took quite a sizable amount while I was in the middle of objecting and doing appeals. When I tried to say, why are you doing this while we are doing this, they never bothered to respond. I've even written to their commissioner, but they're not willing to communicate. Yeah. And for me, it makes sense why the tax morality is at its lowest.
Absolutely.
That is behaving like they're above the law.
Sure, Tabang, I've got to stop you there. And again, it's that conversation, right? That whatever interventions you bring in place, the population needs to feel like they are part of the system. And at this stage, it just feels like stuff is being imposed. And Tabang's conversation, I don't want to take two more questions. And there's lots more calls. I can tell you that now. Lots more calls. And then I want you to talk a little bit about the VDP with the understanding that you come back again. Yeah? It's very, very important that you come back again for us to be able to connect these things. Otherwise, it's a game. We're playing games. We're not doing the building that we're supposed to be doing. Let's talk to Shoy in Benoni. Hi, Shoy.
Good evening, Braot.
Hey, Tara, Brashoy.
No, my question is, look, I am employed, I'm paying my tax, but then I'm doing e-hailing on a site, Uber to be specific. Am I required to pay tax from my side hustle income? And then if the answer is yes, how are they evaluating my operational costs in terms of fuel, servicing the vehicle, buying the tires, and all of those things? Thank you, Bro.
Ita Brashoy. Let's talk to, can I take one more call and then you put those together? Let's speak to Sean in Greenstone. Hi, Sean.
Hey, Aubrey, and your guest. Yeah, I just I think touching on what everyone else said. I think just as a hint, I think SARS would get a lot further if they just had a sense of humility and dropped the arrogance and the scary act and just try to act like we were people to people kind of connections. I think especially the younger generation, we need kind of that, remove the fear from it, and I think it'll work a lot better for them. Just on the issue of tax compliance and morality, there's always so much pressure on the average man to pay taxes. What about the billionaires and the big companies? I don't hear enough about how much they actually pay, because we hear about the Panama Papers and all these different vehicles and tools that the billionaires and the extremely wealthy have to hide their money or move their money. And it doesn't seem like they really pay much taxes. I mean, in America, and I'm sure it's similar in the same case here, many of these tax people, we actually pay more than the billionaires are paying in taxes and some of the companies. So can we put more of a highlight on how much tax these companies are actually paying and how much these billionaires are actually paying every year? Because I don't know. And
Sean, I hear you, brother. Thanks very much for your call. Much appreciated. Again, it's a conversation for another day outside of the technical conversation for the VDP that you and I were supposed to talk about this evening. But I'm hoping that this highlights, particularly for SARS, the disconnect that there is between South Africans, taxpayers, and the issue of tax morality. So even if they give us these wonderful things like the voluntary disclosure program, it's wonderful, it's nice. But if it's being given to disgruntled people that have no connection to why there needs to be a tax morality, that facility, as brilliant as it might not work as effectively as it could if there was the kind of buy-in that I'm trying to sort of foster here. How do you respond to the two calls? And then let's just briefly, I mean, we've got 2 minutes. Talk to me what VDP is. Okay. With the understanding you're coming back.
Yes,
okay.
100%. Happy to come back, and I'm glad that this has at least opened the conversation.
Sure.
And, you know, a lot of people seem to be phoning in and seem to be engaging on the topic, and that's important that we speak about compliance, tax morality, the VDP, avenues that are available. And before I answer the two gentlemen's questions, I just want to indicate that as much as the Tax Administration Act binds the taxpayer, SARS are equally bound to the TAA. Taxpayers have rights. Again, the enforcement of those rights, and unfortunately not everyone perhaps has the resources to pay a professional, as we spoke about earlier, to enforce those rights against a body like SARS. And I totally understand the fear element that the last gentleman spoke about, that often there's often a fear element in dealing with SARS due to the
feeling like it's a big bully,
Yes. But again, through engaging and perhaps using the tools at your disposal, becoming educated as a taxpayer, being prudent enough to understand the fact that, listen, this is not my area of expertise. I need to get someone to assist me to ensure tax compliance moving forward. If anything happens, then a tax practitioner or the person assisting me with my taxes is suitably qualified to step in and assist if need be. In terms of the first gentleman's question, if he drives the Uber as a side hustle, there is in all probability a statement that Uber will publish in terms of the income. I'm not too familiar with the driver side of the app, but I'm sure there's a statement that one can download, a monthly statement similar to the user version, and you can then claim your expenses and declare that on your tax return, and again, only pay tax on your profit.
See, you keep repeating that, paying tax on your profit. And you've said it, I think, 3 times, and only now it's sort of dawning on me that it's not tax on that whole amount. It's just on the profit side. We need to know this. Folks need to know this. I don't think people do. So we need to know this. 2 minutes. What is the VDP, the high-level understanding of what the VDP is? You already started off by telling us that you've got to volunteer to give that information, with the understanding that you'll be back to come and talk about this.
We will definitely be back.
Yeah.
The VDP gives our taxpayers an opportunity to come forward on a voluntary basis and declare their tax defaults to SARS. The avenue of VDP, importantly, only remains available to taxpayers where SARS have not knocked on your door first and inquired into your affairs. There are certain legislative requirements, which we'll delve into, I think, in our next session. Sure. But on a high level, the VDP is important because it allows taxpayers to come forward on a voluntary basis to declare their tax defaults, to enter into an agreement with the commissioner that outlines the amount to be paid, by when, confirming the waiver of all penalties except in instances of tax evasion and gross negligence, which often is not a factor we note from the clients that we assist. And most importantly, the commissioner, in terms of a successful VDP, grants full immunity from criminal prosecution in terms of the disclosed default.
André, thanks very much for coming through. I really, really appreciate you coming through and coming to studio to come and check us out. But I'm glad that I have the undertaking that you guys will be coming back again to discuss the VDP. But I think in broader terms, we really need you to help us understand the tax regime. And I want to keep going back to certain things like tax residency, because I think we need to understand and which portion of the income is being taxed. You keep repeating the fact that it's the profit portion of the income that is taxed. We need to understand that. But I think that we've already started a conversation that is going to make people feel like the tax conversation is one that they can relate to. How do people get in touch with you at Tax Consulting SA?
Okay. They're welcome to email contact@taxconsulting.co.za, and we can move forward there. I'd really like to help the gentleman that indicated earlier that SARS keep garnishing his account. Perhaps we can get in touch with him and see maybe there's some way we can assist.
All right. Give me that contact detail again.
Contact@taxconsulting.co.za.
André Daniels, Head of Tax Controversy and Dispute Resolution at Tax Consulting SA. Thank you very much for joining us.